Hello there. I believe it's time for another creepy story. Hello back again. Today I bring you another 10 stories who claim to be 100% real. Issei Sagawa, the Japanese cannibal who admitted he still fantasized about killing and eating women after killing and eating a woman in Paris, walks free, unmedicated and unmonitored in Japan to this day. Pretty creepy to know people like that walks around freely. Story number 12. Fatal familial insomnia. The whole story is batshit and perhaps the most terrifying Wikipedia rabbit hole I've ever gone down. Only a few families have this genetic disorder, and once you develop it, that's it. You die an agonizing death from an inability to sleep. It starts off like regular insomnia, but progress over a few years until you legit, go insane and finally shut down. Nothing, not even the most potent drug, can induce sleep. Even when they tried to put them in comas, the brain remained completely active. That's a Russian sleep experiment in real. Story number 13. Last summer, in my city, a 14-year-old girl was raped near a train station. After her abuser left, she tried to get help and flagged down a vehicle and was raped a second time in the car of the man who stopped. Two complete strangers raped her on the same day. It happened only a few miles away from my house, and I still think about it from time to time. Story number 14. This is second hand from my mom, so I don't remember everything, but when I was younger, like 3 or 4, and she was home alone with me, some guy came up to the door. This was before cell phones and people were nicer, so she answered it even though it was like 8 or 9 at night. Well, the guy was asking if he could come in and use her phone, but she said no. He asked a couple more times before walking in and immediately got stopped by the family dog, grabbing his hand and holding it tightly. He started to get nervous, and my dad's dog led him back to the door. He had walked further in at this point. My mom was able to push him out and lock the door before running upstairs and calling the police. The cops picked him up a little while later, and they found out he had been in a bar fight and stabbed a guy a bunch of times. Without my older brother, my mom and I could have been seriously hurt. He was the best dog I ever lived till the rape age of 15. Story number 15. I lived in apartment in Marina del Rey, California. 9 years ago, just before Halloween, our third floor balcony was decorated with a prop of a dead man slumped over in a chair. For a few days, every time I'd come home, I'd look up and I'd think how cool looking it was and wondering why they didn't have lights shining on it at night. After a few days, people realized it was actually the resident of the apartment who killed himself. I was looking at the corpse, thinking how cool it was. Story number 16. Not the scariest thing that I know about, but the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I worked at a pretty well-known record store in Los Angeles in the 90s. A guy in his early 20s used to come and ask me about records a lot, and one day in conversation he let a weird detail about my life slip that I hadn't told him. My dad is not American. I brushed it off, thinking my co-workers had mentioned it to him since he was such a regular, About a week later, I was driving home and my car broke down. It was incredibly hot and I had to walk several miles to get to a payphone, which was outside an elementary school. I called a cab and hung up the phone, and after sitting a moment, it started ringing, so I picked it up. The person on the other end said, "Bad luck about your car. Talk to me until your ride gets there." I hung up the phone, but it was definitely that guy. He had to have followed me from home, trailed me from the car, called the school to ask for the payphone number, and found a way to call me at that number. There weren't really cell phones at that time, but there was a gas station and a grocery store across the street, so who knows. I immediately quit my job and moved back in with my parents within 48 hours. I went to visit old friends from work a few months later, and they told me the guy was arrested for kidnapping. Story number 17. This is from the days when I used to live back home. I used to live in Karachi, Pakistan, but now moved to UK. We used to live very close to a CID, Police Investigation Department, aka Pakistani FBI, building, which we all were unaware of and always thought it was just an ordinary government building till on 11th November 2010. On that day, around evening time coming home from work, I thought I better hit the gym because they had a sauna, and after being tired from all day work, that sounded like a good idea. Which was hardly 0.3 miles away, so I decided to walk to the gym. I changed quickly and left for the gym and started walking towards it. I've hardly walked like 10 minutes and I am 0.1 miles away roughly, and all of a sudden, for a nanosecond, I feel that ground is shaking, and the next thing I hear is the loudest bang I ever heard, followed by a pressure kick into my chest. Now to let you guys know, my both ears started bleeding because the bang was so loud, and for the reference, the kick in the chest was a bat, as Big Show wearing military boots and kicking you in the chest straight with full force. Next thing, I'm on the ground covering my ears because they are in agony, and covered in dirt trying to figure out what's happening. As I'm trying to figure out, I can see all the car's alarm have gone off. Anything made up of glass has been shattered in roughly 1 to 2 miles area. I'm still trying to figure out what happened, and I start smelling gunpowder, and as if someone is making a barbecue and is being burned. I will always remember that smell, which was something unsettling. Next thing, rock and dust particles start landing on me and the surrounding area, which has 1 to 1.5 inches long of pieces of human skin and flesh. I'm not believing that I have another human skin pieces stuck to my arm. I brush up my clothes and arms, getting up and covering my ears, recovering from that pressure kick. As I move closer to a spot in a street where I am hearing loads of people screaming and crying, I see a few 3 to 5 feet cracks between some walls of the building, which have been destroyed by the shockwave of the bang. I see the gap between a wall and move into the area where I see the scenes straight from a Hollywood movie, where people are crying, cars on fire, and dead bodies on the ground. By this time, I'm thinking it's a bomb blast, and that's what happened. As if move closer, I see 10 feet and 30 feet wide crater which has been filled with the water, and the building, which was a CID building, is no longer there. There are hundreds of people lying on the ground, crying for help, as some of them don't even have legs or limbs, or some don't have their complete bottom. I'm still in a state of shock, looking around, and I see a woman crying and hitting herself because she had her husband dead, whose legs and torso was missing. I seen that later. I see several people without legs, brains out and no hands. One thing which haunted me for sure was an 18 to 20-year-old guy who was dead and lying on the floor towards his chest on the floor with his neck turned towards me. I can still remember him looking straight into my eyes. His feet were flipped the other way around. After the police arrived and media arrived, I came back home after it got crowded. After I came home after the dusk every day, I would see that guy standing and staring into my eyes. I would wake up screaming throughout the night and see that guy standing at the doorway just staring me. For 2 to 3 weeks, I would see this guy regularly during midnight standing in my hallway, staring through my soul. I still remember that guy's face and the shockwave and the sound of the blast. According to BBC, it said, eyewitnesses said the blast left a crater 12 meters, so around 40 feet wide, in front of the gutted building in Pakistan's financial and commercial capital. Story number 18. I once received a random phone call from a girl who found my number from a Google search of my address listed on a resume. She was freaking out and wanted me to check up on her father, who lived a few doors down in an apartment complex I resided in. While she was on the phone with me, I walked over to his door and knocked on it. No answer. She pleaded for me to enter the unit, and I got nervous and refused, instead reporting the incident to the building manager. The manager said she would call the police to perform a wellness check. The father had killed himself. Story number 19. Back in 2000, I believe, I was in 5th grade living in California, and it was late at night. My family was just at the house and suddenly there was a huge banging on the door that just kept going like someone was scared. My dad went to answer it and it was a lady that just came in. I was pretty young and I don't remember the details, but apparently she was saying there was a guy on a horse chasing her, trying to either kill her or something. My family was being nice but skeptical until they saw a man on a horse outside the house. Horses aren't exactly that common to see out and about, even though there are a few places that have them. I could only imagine what the lady was going through. She even came back a few days later and thanked my dad with flowers and said he saved her life. Story number 20. My grandmother used to work at a mental illness facility when I was little. It was a place prisoners went after committing crimes that were so horrific they were deemed very mentally unstable and not suitable for a prison. One of her patients, who was very fond of her, was put into this place because he had strangled his mom and dad one night, hid their bodies under the floorboards, and every now and then brought his mother's body up to have sex with. He was caught after a few months because the smell of rotting corpses had reached the neighbors and they were cornered that they hadn't seen them in a while. My grandmother lived within walking distance from this facility and so the prisoners that were deemed well enough to roam around the grounds were able to see her walking home. One of the other patients must have told him about where she lived because one night he escaped and went straight to my grandmother's house, knocking on the door and begging to come in. Safe to say, he was caught very quickly and my grandparents later moved houses. Still scary to imagine though. Did you enjoy this one? If yes, you can leave a like or you can subscribe. or you can just watch more videos. Good night.